All right, everybody, welcome to the Wednesday live stream. It's 4 o'clock Mountain Time. We do a live stream every Wednesday at 4 o'clock. This week, we're talking a little bit about abortion. I've worked with an organization for the past about 5 years now on campus when they've come. So pretty much since I started at Colorado State, this has been an organization that I've run into, and then since then really wanted to partner with after seeing the ways that they go about reaching and talking with people about abortion. And in today's time, more than anywhere, any time in some ways, that seems very relevant as people are really talking about this with the recent changes with Roe versus Wade. And so today we got Jon Wagner, who's part of Justice for All, the ministry that I've just been talking about. And he's going to be sharing with us some of the things that they do and how they go about really having conversations with people about abortion. And so I'm excited to have him. So Jon, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. Thanks for having me. Welcome,
Yeah.
everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to have you on because I think today this is something that a lot of people are maybe even asking about more than they have in the past of how do I go about talking with my friends about this abortion issue? In light of, in some ways, the fact that like Roe versus Wade seems to make this more of a conversation that's coming up.
Right.
And people are like, I don't really know how to have this conversation in a way that's loving and understanding. And that's what I think with all the different ministries that I've connected with over the years, the trainings that I've gone to regarding talking about abortion, I think you guys do this better than anybody. And so that's why I'm really excited to have you on. My first question, just so the audience maybe can kind of know a little bit more of who you are.
Yeah.
Tell us about what is JFA? How did you get involved? And why is this the organization in some ways that you've chosen to kind of focus your own energy in?
Yeah. No, thanks so much again for having me. Justice for All is an educational pro-life ministry, and our goal is to train people to have that healthy discussion. We do believe that that's something that a lot of people have just neglected or didn't think was even possible. And so trying to help people have, create conversations, keep them civil, maneuver through different conversations. We think that's something that's really, really important to have. And like you said, I think there was the last bunch of years kind of a sense that you couldn't really have this dialogue, or hey, it's a national thing, Roe v. Wade's in place, so there's nothing to do. I think that's different now for sure. We always thought there was an opportunity for conversation, but I think the average person maybe just didn't think they could do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to come up more often, whether people like it or not. And so
Right.
we feel like we're very primed and ready. We've been around the country a lot over the last bunch of years. I've been doing this 15 years, and we've met thousands of people. And a lot of the people we've trained, those tens of thousands of people, are spread out all around the country and ready to be, healthy advocates for the preborn and, loving women, even loving people that disagree with them. So, yeah, a little bit of history, and I'll just give a few details. Ask more if you, want more
Sure.
details as well. But Justice for All came out of Wichita, Kansas. There was a local group of advocates that had felt convicted to care about the preborn, to care about women in need, and kind of around there's a late term abortion clinic there that has still exists, but it's actually under different management, whatever. But in the early 90s, there was a lot of people really concerned about that clinic, and there was different protests, there was different people out there advocating, trying to help people get resources and things like that. And so early on in those days, there was a lot of advocates in Wichita trying to help get a local pregnancy center started and up and running and different things like that. And a lot of the people who ended up being involved with Justice for All, including founder David Lee, they were involved locally there, and it was mainly that local presence. But I think they started realizing that, one, there was a lot of people praying and helping out in front of the clinic and helping people get connected to the pregnancy center, but not necessarily very many people talking to just average students or their friends and family or just everyday people you could say upstream in a sense. So I think there was two different things going on there. There was a sense of, we have a lot of people in this one space that's very critical, trying to help with adoption and try to help with crisis pregnancy and things like that. But then there's also this huge need of just the everyday person being able to be a good advocate. And so he, he kind of formed this group of Justice for All. And one of the major things they would do early on is to go to college campuses and talk to students. And so I came to the group, much later in 2005 as a student from Azusa Pacific University. But yeah, early on, there was just an opportunity to get out, and there's just thousands of students at these bigger campuses, and a lot of them waiting for classes to start and this and that. And so there's huge opportunities to engage places like CSU and others.
Yeah, for sure. So how many, in the course of a year, how many campuses do you guys end up going to? And then when you're on a campus, what does that look like? What are you guys doing? Especially, I think the trainings, we'll even talk about it a little bit later, but how is it that you're going on campus to talk with the students that aren't already connected with you, to try to engage with the students that maybe aren't of the same view that we have regarding abortion?
Yeah. So a lot of times what we're doing is working with a local club. Maybe it's could be a Christian club. It could be a lot of times a pro-life club. And they're inviting us onto campus. So we have the free speech opportunity there. And we are often setting up a display that would have fetal development, questions, different topics to just help engage people on the subject. And we found over the years that that's actually very engaging for a lot of students. Now, there's a high percentage of students that'll just walk by and laugh or ridicule or things like that. But there's a lot of people that will have that conversation. That's what hit me in 2005, Noah, is coming to Texas on this first trip that I took with a few students from my school. I was just amazed at how many people would actually talk to us. And I still remember one of the reflections from a different student that came to help. She was just saying that she learned if we were willing to empathize with people and really take them seriously, she found that the other people would take us seriously. And I found out over the last 15 years, like I said, there's always going to be someone that doesn't care, doesn't want to talk to us, but we find there's so many people that will, and we have that opportunity to advocate, but also not necessarily more importantly, but just as importantly, reach them, connect with them personally. So a lot of times the discussion goes off of abortion to some other issue in just the spiritual realm, but essentially these are all spiritual conversations, but we're talking from that abortion subject, and it's a very relevant one for so many people.
Yeah, for sure. So how do you guys get the conversations even going? I think that's some of what I think people have with the intimidation of talking about this is a lot of times, like, if the subject comes up, it's someone being really angry that you're pro-life.
Right.
And then, like, where do you go from there when they're already angry? But even before that, like, if I'm wanting to even try to bring up that subject, how do you go about bringing it up? And then we can tackle after that. How do you maybe help, not disengage, what's the word I'm looking for? De-escalate the situation when someone comes in really heated.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I would break these into two categories, because I do think for a lot of people, they're going to say, hey, Noah, look, I'm not going to bring this up. It's going to be totally random or weird. And I would disagree. I think you disagree as well, that, yeah, it might be weird in some ways, but most people have an opinion on this. And if you're careful about it, you're gracious. I think even just asking a friend, hey, what is your view on this topic? I'd love to listen to you and understand where you're coming from and have a discussion. I think a lot of people would be open. We're oftentimes talking to strangers. So some of the ways that we'll connect with people is they're walking by our display, or they're walking through the center of campus, and we might just say, hey, would you like to share your opinion today? Or do you want to weigh in today? What's your view on abortion? Or what's your view on our poll question? We might have a question like, should abortion remain legal, or should abortion be made illegal? Things like that, just to engage people. And it gets a fair number of people interacting. And actually, quite a few people don't even know which side we're on. So we're not necessarily trying to fake anybody out, but it's not so obvious, at least a lot of the time. And people will just ask, hey, which side are you on? And we found a lot of people will want to talk in that way. So some sort of introductory question. But I do want to stress that I think it's not the end of the world to just ask somebody, hey, there's this really significant topic come up a lot in the news. I'm just curious what you think about abortion. And even those little things at the beginning, just to signal that this isn't some cavalier topic, I think a lot of people are really open to engaging.
Right. Yeah, I think that idea of asking questions is really central to all of this. Like,
Mhm.
I think a lot of times people, especially with not just with abortion, but anything that's kind of a hot topic issue, that I think Christianity has a hard stance on. What people will end up doing when they're like, all right, I've decided I do feel like I want to be bold enough to bring it up, is they go with the route of, well, what that means is I need to go up to them and say, hey, this is why abortion's wrong. Like, and
Yeah,
start the conversation that way. And of course, like that combative start to it sets the tone.
right.
And if instead you kind of come with, hey, let's explore and talk about this together, and just asking questions of like, I'm just wanting to understand your viewpoint, and even phrasing that in a way of like, as you said, like, what's your view on this? You're not even assuming what their viewpoint is in it, because I think there is sometimes that I've gotten in conversations with students, and me even just asking like, I'm just trying to understand your viewpoint. They kind of still feel like, well, you're probably only asking because you have a different view than me, and
Right.
so it still feels combative. So to ask, hey, what is your view on that, I think is even a key in that, to go one step even further back than I'm trying to understand your viewpoint, that will get people engaged a little bit more than something else. So
Yeah, sometimes I'll ask students, they'll say, hey, what's this about? Or what's this free speech board about? Because we'll just let people write whatever they want. And that's another way. It's, twofold. It's a way for people to engage and draw people in, but it's also a way for some people who don't want to talk yet to be able to write their answer. Um, but I'll say, yeah, would you like to weigh in or take our poll? And we're really curious because there's a lot of people that come by with various views. They're all pro-choice, or a lot of pro-life too, but all the pro-choice people that come by are coming from different angles. So where are you coming from? What's your view? Even if they say off the bat, hey, I'm pro-choice, what does that mean to you? Help me understand. I really am curious. I have opinion for sure, but where are you coming from? And I think that really can de-escalate it and help people understand, this is a serious topic. We're not taking it lightly, but we really do care. And let's have a conversation about it. And I think that really does help. The other thing that I think could help a lot is the idea of common ground. And we could cycle through some of these different things, but like with common ground,
yeah, for
I
sure.
think sometimes we'll just help people understand, look, we really genuinely care about women in
Yeah,
this situation. We don't think it's simple or easy. And at the same time, we do believe this is an injustice against the preborn. But at the same time, even just being able to have that little bit at the beginning to say this before I go anywhere else, this is a really serious topic and it affects a lot of people. I feel like for some people that's a complete game changer, even right then. Just recently, I had an opportunity. I was talking to somebody actually who I had tried to engage on several spiritual topics, but had not. She really didn't engage at all. She didn't really want to talk about it. And it was interesting. She actually ended up bringing up abortion because her friends were protesting after the leak, the Dobbs leak. And so she was saying, hey, what do you think about this? I mean, my friends are totally up in arms. And she has no clue what I do. Like, this is a kind of a random connection point. And
yeah,
so I easily given her a 30-minute lecture on everything I knew, or longer than that, right? And instead, I said, before I even tell you what I think about it, like, this is just a serious topic. I mean, this is significant. It affects a lot of people, and it's understandable that different people have all these different, frustrations or whatever. People are coming from different angles. And then I actually said, if you're talking about the Dobbs case, I actually think a lot of pro-choice people actually would probably agree with the Roe versus Wade being overturned, or with the 15-week ban being upheld, things like that, in the sense that they actually think it should be with the states, and that it shouldn't have been a blanket thing across the country. So it was kind of interesting, this common ground of, hey, this is actually not so simple. And maybe your friends think it's a lot simpler, but there's actually multiple layers here. Now, if you're talking about Roe versus Wade in general, or should abortion be legal, I think it's an injustice for sure. So I wasn't cagey. I told her what I thought, and then we went on with the discussion. But it was interesting. She was very interested, leaning in, asking me questions. And I don't think that would have been the case if I would have just slammed her with, 20 seconds or 20 minutes of content.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the most central things when I've gone to your guys' training is having that main focus on, as much as possible and in any moment that you can, try to acknowledge common ground that you have with the person
Mm-hmm.
that you're talking with. This isn't always about trying to show them why they're wrong about this or that, and combat it's as much as possible coming alongside each other and saying like, hey, these are things that we can agree on that are some of the problems that exist in this situation. As you mentioned, like a question that I think you guys usually ask is like, how to what point do you think it's okay to have an abortion? Because even
Right.
most pro-choice people, and there's exception to this, but most people that would even call themselves pro-choice still aren't okay with you terminating the pregnancy 2 days before your due date. So there's some level that like we still have an agreement on things like that, or someone terminating the pregnancy because they just didn't want a girl and they're going to have a girl. Like, so there's some extent that we have those elements of common ground. Or on the other side of that, the things that they're not expecting us to agree with them on is, I do think that there needs to be help that's given to the woman that's pregnant, and there should be resources given to her financially and physically and support and whatever else. And too often do I think the pro-life side, our side, doesn't emphasize that enough. And so there is that element, you've kind of hinted at it, that people think if you're pro-life, you really only care about making sure that the child isn't aborted. And
Right.
everything after that, you don't care. You don't want to take care of the child. You don't want to help the mother with raising the child. And that's like one of the biggest things. So if we can come in common ground with them to say like, yeah, I agree. I think we need to make the foster care system much better than it is. All of a sudden, I think they're a lot more open to hear what we have to say.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even all the way back in 2005 when I started, so I guess it's been 16, 17 years, at that Texas event, we were wrestling through this a lot as well. And this was a process. I mean, our director, Steve Wagner, wrote this book, Common Ground Without Compromise. I think it was 2008. But even before that, we were wrestling through a lot of that. Me, real personally, because he's my brother. So we were able to talk about this a lot. I still remember when he was saying, hey, here's a bunch of questions I think most people agree on. I'm thinking about writing this book to try to see, hey, there's a lot of agreement on these things. Could we start with agreement and then go to areas of disagreement? And I think that was a big contribution, both in the book form, but also practicing that on campus, because what a lot of people wanted to do is either throw out common ground altogether, like let's just fight, right? Let's just get on TV and fight, or let's just, argue online, whatever. Or they wanted to say, look, we disagree. Let's just be nice to each other. Let's only talk about things that we agree on, but then kind of ignore any other tension. And that, he would say, that's compromise, right? We're asking people to genuinely agree where they do agree so that we can get further in the discussion. The irony there is it actually centers us where we disagree, right? So for instance, with, let's say, the foster care system, I remember talking to somebody in North Texas about this, that, hey, like, she was adopted, right? But before that, she was in foster care. And I said, wow, like, tell me more about your story. I mean, this is somewhere I'm just trying to listen. I'm just trying to understand. And she gives me, 10 minutes of background on her life and all these different things. What was interesting is all that actually fed into the later part of the conversation, because I'm saying, wow, I'm agreeing that foster care is challenging, or adoption could be improved, or even in a really ideal adoption case, that could be really tough. But then I was able to ask her later, 20, 30 minutes later, is it harder to get adopted later or earlier? And
Mm.
she goes, oh, it's way harder later. So I said, well, it seems odd. I mean, if it's harder to get adopted later, it seems like, if anything, you'd have more freedom to kill later, right? So it seems like it's the easiest to be adopted early. Again, this was 30 minutes in or 45 minutes in. By this point, she was not offended at all that I would bring up this challenge,
Mm.
because we've already talked about her life. I've, really given her a space to share, and I cared about her. And, we were able to talk through our different viewpoints in that. But the interesting thing about common ground is it actually can help us, if we do it right, can get us even to further parts of the conversation, because it focuses in on where we disagree, but then we're kind of friends rather than enemies at that point of the conversation.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of the tactics that you guys bring out there, whether it's asking questions or this, again, I think one of the biggest focuses that you guys point out, and I think the biggest thing that I learned doing your guys' training was really always looking for that common ground. So asking questions, which I feel like I've done pretty well with that already, doing a lot of tactics, Columbo
Mm-hmm.
tactic stuff.
Yeah.
But learning to, like, as much as I can acknowledge that common ground creates this really friendship to a point that, like, instead of looking at it as like, you have your view on this and I have my view on this and we're going to duke it out. It's more
Yeah.
of, we might have a little bit of a different view on this topic that we're both trying to figure out how to best deal with.
Yeah.
And let's see if we can work together to find the best solution to it. That has a very different feel to it than
Mm-hmm.
coming and saying, I think you're wrong and here's why, and here's all the logic that's flawed about your thinking. It's a totally different experience in that.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, Noah, because if, like, a lot of times we can even go like the flip side. If somebody shares their viewpoint, we ask them questions, and not just, what do you believe about abortion, but, why do you believe that? And go into a lot of different detail and try to understand which timing, which circumstances. Do you think it should be illegal or not? Some people are totally against abortion, but they don't want it to be illegal, for all sorts of different reasons. And it's just, it's an interesting opportunity to, to check in with them and to understand more about their view, I guess, when they, I don't know where I was going with that now. I totally blanked. But
Yeah.
we can just go on to another question. Maybe I'll
Right.
remember.
Yeah, no worries. So, like,
But
we've kind of talked about two of the things that at least I would say are two of the biggest tips that I would give people when they're talking about this. One of using tactics, Columbo tactic, kind of to ask questions. And we haven't used that term Columbo, but most of my followers are going to be familiar with that and other things that I've talked about. But then the other thing of common ground, what would be some of the things that you would just say, if somebody's like, hey, what's your biggest tips on how to talk about abortion with people? What would you give them?
yeah, absolutely. And I finally remembered. So you're good. I'll weave it in.
Yeah.
But first one would be to try to start somewhere. I think this is something most people just don't want to acknowledge, I guess, or maybe just don't see. It's like out of left field, is just to start somewhere. And if it, like with our basic tactics of asking questions and listening, you don't even have to give your viewpoint. Even if you could not articulate the pro-life viewpoint, uh, you could still ask somebody what they believe and why, and you could be gracious and listen, right? And at the same time, even if you go a little bit beyond that, where they say, well, I mean, what's your view? Say, I think this is a human being and I don't think they should be killed. I mean, it doesn't have to be super extensive, right? Where you have to give all the answers before they ask them. But I do think that a lot of people, they don't want to start talking to anybody. They want to know everything first. And most of the things that we learn, especially in terms of tactics, is coming from making mistakes, trying, just hearing people out and understanding what might be helpful in any specific circumstance. But I think that part of what's going on in this discussion, especially, is there's like a technical answer that you could give or write about, for instance, at any moment. But there's also like, what is helpful for this person right now?
Right.
Right. They just told me that their mom had an abortion. Therefore, they don't care what my view is and they don't care what the truth is. Well, at that point, I could just keep throwing evidence at them, but this is a question about whether they're even willing to follow the truth where it leads, right? This is a much deeper question. So it totally depends on who we're talking to in that way. So I would say, one, don't be silent. We got to start somewhere. And one thing we do in our Abortion from Debate to Dialogue seminar is we'll challenge people. Okay, think of 3 people in your life, right? And so anybody on this call, you could think about 3 people. And I think for a lot of people, they're naturally going to think of like the toughest person in their life, right? So you could have that person on the list. But what I would say is think of like a very easy person to talk to. Then somebody who's in the middle, maybe could be a challenge, maybe someone you work with or a friend that you don't know their viewpoint, but they respect you, that kind of thing. And then the third one could be like your maybe an aunt or uncle that you're like, oh, I know what their view is. They're going to yell at me, Okay, well, start with the person that's easy. Practice the listening, practice the asking questions, And again, there's a lot of books to read on this that you can get a hold of and things like that from Scott Klusendorf or Stephanie Gray, Trent Horn, others. But at the same time, you don't have to know everything before starting. And in fact, that's where a lot of the genuine humility can come from, is just trying to get to know people and have that discussion. Then after that, though, I would say it's really important to kind of have a healthy seriousness, I guess. One of the things I was going to bring up before that I forgot is just as we're talking to people, sometimes they'll even joke around like, oh, this is, we're showing the truth about abortion. We're sharing this really heavy topic. And it's like, oh, this is so stupid. You guys are annoying. You're a waste of time. And sometimes I'll ask somebody like that, hey, I could say, can we agree that this is a serious topic? I mean, we disagree. I can tell we disagree. But can we agree that there's a lot going on here and this is not a joke? And right. Even a lot of people that'll say, wow, you're totally right. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm just annoyed. I thought you guys were going to yell at me or something. And it's like, no, not at all. And I'll actually do this. I'll say, here's the thing. If you're correct, I'm actually wasting my time. And if you're correct, I'm totally wrong. So instead of saying, if I'm correct, you're wrong, I'm going to kind of say, hey, if you're correct about the preborn or about abortion in general, then I'm not actually right. So it kind of disarms a lot. And a lot of the people are more open to discussing in that way. But I guess the point is having a healthy seriousness about it to say, let's have this discussion. Because it's serious, I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to listen even better than normal. Yeah. I'm going to try to ask questions rather than making statements. And I think that gives the issue the respect it deserves, because these are real human beings in the womb for sure. But also we're talking about the mom who's in a really tough situation a lot of times, or at whatever the situation, it's complex. And that doesn't mean abortion's neutral or something like that, but it does mean that we can be really careful and care for that person.
Yeah, definitely. So on the other end of that, like those are some really great tips, I think, of how to start conversation, how to do conversation in a way that people are actually going to care what you have to say, feel cared for, which is a lot of them caring about what you have to say is they feel cared for as well. Yeah. What do you think are some common blunders that people make, common mistakes that people make when talking about abortion?
Yeah. Other than just not trying at all, I would say another one for sure would be challenging too quickly. Now, it depends on the context, right? If you're in a formal debate, that's what you're doing, right? If you're even in an interview, I think a lot of times that's more natural. But if we're just talking to a stranger or especially a friend where you have this long-term relationship, we don't see any need to just jump in, full throttle. Like, here's where you're wrong. Let me show you 5 different reasons. I can't believe you'd have a pro-choice view, things like that. So I believe that usually within 3 to 5 minutes, you'll have an opportunity to challenge the person, but they're probably at that point asking for it, versus being like, okay, you're annoying and you're just kind of pushing your view on me. And so I do think that while we very much need to challenge people, and I'll get into that more, I think sometimes we do that too quickly, and it's out of selfishness. And we're antsy and we're just trying to get our point across, when really I'll tell people, as I'm in the training, for instance, I'll say, I want them to actually listen to me. It's like, I want to actually convince them. I don't want to just win an argument for argument's sake, right. But I would like to help them understand the truth. And part of that is going to be, let's let's just get to know their view a little bit. One of the things our founder David Lee talked about was kind of taking a bunch of snapshots of their life, almost to get like this, collage of what their life is. And we just need to take genuine interest in people. And I do think that shines through authentically if you're actually doing that versus if you're faking it. But as an example, if we say, somebody says they're pro-choice, what does pro-choice mean to you? And they give their answer. After 24 weeks, I'm against it, but before that, it's women's choice, whatever. Okay, well, help me understand more about the circumstances. Do you have any idea about that, or where you'd be okay with abortion versus not, or have you always believed this, or did you have a different view before? A lot of times that'll bring up, maybe somebody goes, yeah, I had this friend that had an abortion and I thought it was wrong, but now I've realized I don't think it's wrong. Whatever it is, you get context for who they are, and that gives me a lot of not just next steps, but it also gives me an understanding of who this person is. And I'm a Christian. I don't know everybody on your feed is a Christian or not, or people watching, but that's partly coming from that conviction as well. We actually really love this person who's in front of us, even if they hate us, even if they disagree with us, because that's what Christ would do, and that's what he did for us, when we were his enemies. And so we really want to be authentic in that way and just really get to know the person. So yeah, that challenging factor is a big deal. And we tell people there's no formula for it. But usually if you ask people questions, you listen, you're interacting on this, it's going to get fairly quickly to that tense point of, what is the unborn, and why, when should human beings count or not, and all these different questions. Usually you're going to get to that place fairly quickly anyway. And so you have that opportunity. And so just real quickly, though, I'd say on that flip side, some people never challenge. So they have this great opportunity. They're laughing with the person. They have this, they're listening, that the person really respects them. Maybe even the person looks up to them. And it's like, well, but I don't want to say anything that's too offensive or going to make them feel bad. But that actually is the thing that could be extremely helpful for them in that conversation. And so it's very okay to lean in that way. For instance, if people often say the baby can't even live outside the womb at 12 weeks, and it's like common ground. You're right. They can't live outside the womb at 12 weeks. But I might say something like, should that make us care for them less or more, given the fact that they can't live outside the womb? And I might even say, just for a second, could we pause? You're saying a totally defenseless baby can't live outside the womb on its own. Now, even just pausing or slowing down, sometimes people will go, wait a second, that doesn't sound right. And I might follow with like, yeah, doesn't it seem like we care for them even more, or the more vulnerable or the more in the way, we'd actually care for them more. So it doesn't mean it convinces everybody, but I think it comes across a lot different when you have made that effort early on. And at the same time, you have that opportunity and the person respects you, even if they don't respect you, but you've put in that effort. It's actually pretty natural to challenge the person. And I found 90 to 95% of the time, it's not weird for them, even if it's a pretty direct challenge, if it's a little ways into the discussion.
Right. Yeah. You bring up an interesting thing of like, all right, this is defenseless being. This is a defenseless human. It seems like those who are at risk, those who are defenseless, especially with how much our culture is about social justice these days.
Right.
It would make sense that we would want to take care of the baby in the womb. Like I've been kind of even thinking over a little bit, and this is kind of changing gears a little bit, but I'd be curious of your thoughts. One of the things that I think we get challenged a lot as pro-life people is, well, you only care about the baby so long as it's in the womb, and then you don't care about the baby, you don't really care about the mother. All you're just making sure is that abortion doesn't happen, but you really aren't pro-life because you're not caring about the lives after that, is the argument that's made. And there's one thing to reply to that, but I've almost been kind of thinking over how we could flip the cards the other way, in the sense that oftentimes the pro-life community wants to the pro-choice community wants to throw it out there as pro-choice is pro-choice because we care about the mother and we want to give them as much options as possible. We care about the vulnerable And so we want to give them as much options as possible. But when we think about it, like, especially, for instance, within the African American community, the most dangerous place in the country for an African American to be is in their mother's womb. They're more likely to get killed in their mother's womb than on the streets of Atlanta or any city that we would see as quite a bit of a racist city. And if so much of the pro-choice community is trying to push against this, you should care about every situation. And you're not pro-life if you don't also care about maternity leave, and you don't also care about immigrants, which are really different subjects. Like, that's not a good argument logically anyways, because it's kind of like saying the American Heart Association can't really do what it does unless it's also trying to fight against cancer. Like, that doesn't follow.
Right.
So it's a bad argument to begin with, but if we were to put the shoe on the other foot, we would see that there's just as much of that kind of trying to point out hypocrisy. Again, it's not logical, but like, you're saying that you care about women, you're saying you're empowering women, but at the same time, what you're actually telling women is either you can have a successful career or you could have this child, but you can't do both.
Right.
And it should be, even if your circumstances are tough, even if you're not economically in a great spot, we still believe that you as a woman are strong enough, powerful enough, and wise enough and knowledgeable enough that you could raise this child, even from the background that you're coming from, and still have a successful career. That would be women's empowerment. That would be pushing women and saying that you're greater and you can do great things, not you have to have an abortion or be successful.
Right.
And I'm just curious, I know that was a kind of a big monologue. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in that circumstance, it is interesting. I think that some people that ask that question or assert that really do care, and they really are curious, like, where we're coming from. Other people,
Right.
I think, are just making an excuse, or they're just painting us a certain way that's not really fair. It's interesting. I think any of those people, no matter which way they're coming from, I think common ground, grace, humility is going to go a long way. For instance, I'll usually start by saying, because I don't know where they're coming from yet, right? I might start by saying, I do think that more should be done. I think there's some people that don't care a whole lot necessarily, but in 16, 17 years of doing this work, I haven't really met anybody, very few, if any, that really only care about the baby in the womb. Now, people might disagree on exactly what tax policy should happen or ways somebody could get help or these various things, but I think that they all care about both. What is different, we'll say to people, hey, if we're wrong, then we shouldn't be wasting our time in the womb. At the same time, if we're correct, then this is an area that's really significant. So what's interesting to me, Noah, is that each of those people, especially if they're really genuinely wrestling with this, there's something deep in them that we actually agree with, which is they really do care about justice. So what's interesting is I believe, and I'm normally pretty optimistic anyway, but I believe that if we have that longer conversation, that's going to benefit us. So in other words, okay, let's talk about it. We agree about, in general, people, babies outside the womb should be cared for. Now, again, we might disagree exactly how that should happen, but let's say people only on the pro-choice side, those people are going to disagree on exactly how to do it too. So it's not like we're all going to agree, but we have agreement there. We agree that it is not an easy thing for the mom. We agree that men a lot of times aren't taking responsibility, and that's part of what's making this really challenging. We agree that it can be really expensive, to raise kids. I have 5 kids. I know it's not easy, and I'll even often say to people in my particular experience, but even with some of my siblings or some friends and family, they've had some pretty great experiences with pregnancy, and it's still not easy. So of course it would be really tough if this is more of a challenging pregnancy, or somebody said, the boyfriend's being really mean, or the dad, or whatever it is, grandparents pressuring, stuff like that. So I think the first thing I would say with that is there is always a place we can try to connect with them, if at all possible. And at the same time, I think there's normally also something we can agree with, like, yeah, this should happen more often, and there should be deeper care. I think, churches, community, my own family should do more. At the same time, does that automatically mean that people don't care or that we're wrong about abortion? Not at all. And sometimes I'll tell people, actually, if you're saying here's foster care, here's adoption, here's all these different things, here's all these needs, all we're saying is that the need's actually greater. So we might disagree on whether the need's greater. Here's this huge group of people that is vulnerable and they're in the womb, and we're saying that they deserve rights. You could say they don't, but let's process through that. So I think there's a lot there where we can agree. And again, the more we get into it, if it's a really healthy discussion, I think it's going to center us to that question, does this preborn human being have rights or not? And should they be counted among those who are vulnerable and who need to be cared for? At the same time, this is maybe, as long as we've had a fairly good conversation, this is where we could be a little bit more challenging or hard-nosed about it. It's kind of like, okay, wait a minute, in what other area, like you brought up the Heart Association, what other area would we say, because you're not doing everything, you shouldn't say that you're doing anything, or what you're doing on this issue doesn't matter? We don't do that with anybody else. We very much want people to diversify in most situations and do something really well. So again, it's a fair argument if somebody says that I'm wasting my time because the preborn don't deserve rights. But it doesn't make sense, if they deserve rights, that we should be doing everything under the sun all at once. Now, do we try to partner with people? Do we try to link to other organizations? Do we try to be creative? Absolutely. But that wouldn't make sense at all. And to try to be doing everything. I bet people actually who focus on adoption or foster care or 5-year-olds would not want us to try to multitask and do a million other things in that way. I think they'd want us to empower them. What's interesting too is that if we said, well, you're just trying to get them, to be born, you could actually put that further, right? And say a lot of the early years are not necessarily easy, but they're a little bit simpler, right? The kids aren't walking, the kids aren't eating as much food, the kids aren't talking. There's some things about that time that are a little bit simpler than maybe when they're 5 or 10 or 15. Right. Could be even bigger challenges. Would we ever advocate that, let's just say that nobody matters until they're 2 or 3 or 4 because there's so many people who are 5 to 18 that are needing to be cared for? We'd never do that, right? And if somebody specialized in that, caring for toddlers, nobody's going to say, yeah, but you're not dealing with emotional issues. You don't even care about that. It'd be similar. I thought of this analogy, like if somebody was extremely good at somehow, emotionally, mentally working with couples in abusive situations, and they were able to make it so that husbands just never abuse their wives.
Yeah.
That's all they did. They're not good at other emotional things. They're not good at anything sexual. They're not good at anything in terms of time management or money management or anything else, even just being like a friend to each other. Nobody in the world would say, oh, that's such a stupid thing you're doing. All you do is get them to not fight. No, they'd say that's an amazing thing you're doing so that they even have an opportunity to have a normal marriage. And in the same way, we're just trying to say, hey, yeah, they're going to be born. That's going to at least give them an opportunity. It was kind of an interesting thing after Roe. There was something that said, people were saying women now will be born with fewer rights than ever. Right? I don't believe that. But what was interesting is the response was, but they're going to be born.
Right. With a little Johnny Depp Pirates of the Caribbean meme to it. Right.
I will say this is kind of a side note, but I would say, do I think generally that type of a thing, that back and forth or whatever, is helpful? I more bring it up. I don't necessarily think it's always helpful, kind of a tit for tat. But I do think that kind of a thing could be helpful, especially, again, several minutes in, to say, wait a second here. I mean, what are we talking about here? We're talking about they don't even get a chance. And so we're worried about healthcare, this or that. These are all very important issues. At the same time, if they're not even going to be born, then what are we talking about in that way? And I think that can, but part of that too is I think people are defensive because they haven't been cared for. They haven't even heard these arguments. A lot of people have just seen memes. They've read a few web pages, or they've had a professor tell them something. And then in general, especially until June 24th, it's just kind of, yeah, obvious that of course I'm going to be pro-choice. I mean, I'm not crazy, right? So in certain places in the country or certain social settings, I mean, they're just naturally becoming pro-choice. I just talked to somebody very recently who said, yeah, I just kind of naturally took the pro-choice position. I didn't really think about it. But once I started looking into it, I became pro-life. And even though my community is against me, I'm still pro-life. Like nobody I know essentially is pro-life, but I'm still pro-life. And I think that's where a lot of people are. And that's where we can have a lot of grace for people. You know, where would we be if somebody didn't teach us, or where would we be if God didn't care for us and show grace to us? And so we can have that type of an attitude, and even for that person that's maybe really annoying or mean, we can try to slow down and process and see what we can do there.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of along that note then, a question that I think a lot of people wonder is, how do I help out someone in that situation? And we discussed a little bit earlier, I think there's two ways to think of this. Is one is, do you know the person already? And what do you do in that situation? And then in the other situation of, I don't really know this person, and maybe it's just I started a conversation about abortion with somebody on a train, and now they're saying like, would you help me? Like, what do I do? What would be your recommendations?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I would say that kind of takes me back to where we're talking about why start the conversation. There are kind of thinking about the Good Samaritan. I mean, there's tens of thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of people walking around, millions of people really walking around hurting, on this issue. They're post-abortive, or they're currently pregnant, trying to figure out what to do, or their friend is, or whatever. Starting that conversation gets us a lot closer to somebody who is in need. And I believe God, puts those opportunities together as well. So when we're willing to just start the conversation. But yeah, I'll start with somebody who is more of a stranger. I mean, when we're on campus, a lot of times we're not meeting people who are pregnant. There's some,
right,
but a lot of times it's a somewhat of a hypothetical conversation. We're hoping that maybe if they get pregnant 3-4 years down the road, that they will think about it differently. Or if they're a guy, maybe they'll take responsibility for their actions. They'll actually stick around and help out, or challenge their guy friends too as well. Things like that. So, but when we do run into a situation, which has happened, fairly often, of, hey, my friend's in need, this and that, we offer some basic things. The main thing would be, I'm going to try to connect them to local help, because a lot of times we're out of town. But we're going to know about the local pregnancy center, or local adoption agency, or local groups that could be helpful, maybe churches that could be helpful, and we could connect them to that help. Especially as a guy, a lot of times it might be someone that doesn't even want to talk to a guy. They might be willing to talk to one of my coworkers who's a woman, or somebody at the pregnancy center. They might be someone who's post-abortive, and we could let them know. And a lot of people are surprised to know that there's free counseling available, and a lot of the people are very willing to get that. So the three basic things, though, would be to show compassion and listen. So just assuming that it kind of comes out of left field, we don't want to just say, okay, come with me to the pregnancy center. Like, they don't know you, like it's a stranger, right? So they're not going to get in a car with me. They're not going to like walk there with me necessarily. So it might not be this easy opportunity to get them help, or to even see if they're willing to get a second opinion, or receive help. But just immediately showing compassion. Sometimes it's being silent for a few seconds, and just hearing them out. Tell me more about the situation. Is there anything we can do to help? That kind of a thing. And that would be the second point, is offering practical help. I think we don't want to be cavalier here, because again, could be a really tough situation. It might not be simple, but at the same time, like you said, a lot of times people get the perception that we don't care, but actually we really do. And so trying to help connect them to those people that do care. Maybe we don't directly have the resources, but maybe somebody else does. The third thing would be to be persistent and pray. So we want to act like a 3-year-old is at stake, or a 10-year-old is at stake, right? In other words, it's not just like, oh yeah, there's this baby. Okay, what can I do, right? No, there's a sense that I could do a lot. I could try to connect them to resources. I could try to help them myself, versus just, I did what I could. I talked to them. I said they shouldn't get an abortion, blah, 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 right? No, I mean, we could try to go further. Are they connected to anybody that, do they respect somebody in that town who they might listen to better than me? Could I try to make another connection? And I want to be persistent. If they've given me their phone number and I'll think about it. I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what my friend wants to do. We don't want to be annoying in some weird way where like, you're calling 20 times a day or harassing them or something like that. But it's like, let's act like this is a serious situation. I'm really ready to help. I have hundreds of people ready to help if you're willing to receive help, that kind of a thing, being persistent in that way. Flip over, if we're talking about something that we know already, it's not that much different, but I think the difference there is you might have more context, or you would surely have maybe better connections, right? If it's somebody from the youth group I was in when I was growing up, I mean, they might respect the youth pastor. They might respect other people we grew up with, right? Even if they don't respect me in that way. And so I think that's probably the difference. One of the things that I think is really significant is kind of like what you were saying about how we really want to empower women, is talking to them or about them. Let's say if we're talking to the friend who's trying to help someone who's pregnant, is, look, your friend or you are a mom, and we want to empower you as a mom. You can be a strong mom, right? I don't want to dance around the topic and be so careful that they lose sight of this serious thing. Like, you are right now a mom. It's not whether you want to be a mom or not. That's what's going on. And we want to empower you in that place. We think you can be strong in that place. And so trying to have that type of empowering language rather than using the term crisis or like, I think I even used that before, but mistakenly, but that kind of a thing, the crisis or being really vague or just being unhelpful in some of those ways, I think we can be really empowering to them. And that is also a time, for instance, if we're in the conversation fairly deep, I think it's very reasonable to say, please do not kill your baby. Please offer them support. Please, we want to empower you to do the right thing. We want to empower you to do the loving thing. It's okay to do that. I mean, there's a lot of times where I would have done the wrong thing and somebody challenged me and in a healthy way, and I didn't do the wrong thing. I think for a lot of people that could be helpful, but there's obviously a balance there. So I think that the main point would be trying to use wisdom. We're not going to know until we're in that situation exactly what to do. But I'll give you an example that happened in Wichita that was really great. I'll use different names, but Susan and Nancy were these gals that I knew. And Nancy is someone who's pregnant, right? She's a foreign exchange student, was pregnant. This is about 7-8 years ago. And her friend, Susan, is somebody that I met at a Bible study. So I don't know Nancy, but I know Susan, right? And she calls me and she goes, okay, I'm so frustrated. I think I totally screwed this up. My friend said she's pregnant, and I kind of freaked out at her, And I said, well, what do you think? Is she not available, not willing to talk to you anymore? And you're like, well, I don't know. I don't think so, because I really was kind of pushy. And I said, here's the thing, Susan, I'm glad that you tried, maybe it wasn't the perfect thing to do, but it's better than not trying at all. But do you think there's any way to reconcile? And she said, well, I don't know, maybe. I mean, we've eaten lunch together before. I said, well, food can heal a lot of stuff. Let's see, maybe you think you could grab her lunch? And so we pray about this, and we work up this idea with her and then her pastor as well. And we just say, okay, what if you go back and, offer to bring her food? She's in a tough place anyway. She's, strapped for cash, all this. She's, thinking about abortion, whatever. And she thought, okay, I'm going to bring food. And she basically apologized and just said, look, I obviously have a strong view on this, but I really love you. I care about you, and I really want to help, and I care about that baby as well. But, I should have been more of, trying to listen and trying to understand where you're coming from. And just, I probably spoke really, maybe too quickly. Mm-hmm. And she was gracious about it, just to kind of try to reconcile in that way. And what we learned through that, Susan learned that Nancy didn't want to get an abortion. She actually thought she was going to do something wrong. So this is why we want to listen and understand, right? She actually was against abortion. She was totally scared because her boyfriend was pressuring her. Her mom was pressuring her to take away funding for school, right? So as pro-lifers, we got to step back a second and say, okay, these types of complexities, or rape, for instance, should not change our view on this human being, right? Even a product of rape, this human being in the womb, they matter just as much as anybody else. We don't
Right.
cave on our position, but at the same time, we got to take a step back. And this is really serious. And this is actually, even a side note, why we want to be a little bit careful, even with analogies. They can be helpful, but when we're talking about the civil rights movement or slavery or this or that, there are parallels, but some of it is not parallel, right? The average woman who's getting an abortion is not trying to find ways to make a ton of extra money by doing the abortion. I mean, she feels trapped, or there's all sorts of different things. It's not like I'm just saying she's a victim in that way or something. She still has to make the right decision and preserve life.
Right.
But at the same time, this is not just some, oh, she just is flippant and doesn't care. A lot of times it's like Nancy, and she really doesn't know what to do. So what we did, not mainly me, but mainly Susan and her church, is they said, look, we want to care for you no matter what. I mean, we want to come around you with love. This is someone who's not a Christian, didn't care, but she was in this community as an international student. She got to know some of these people. And so Nancy is willing to kind of connect a little bit, and willing to get a pregnancy test or get some alternate opinions of what she could be doing. And long story short, there's a bunch of different things that happened. One thing is she had a falling out with her boyfriend, which is the best thing that could have happened, because then he was out of there, right, and he didn't have that pressure. Her mom was softening so that she didn't feel that pressure. And so she's feeling support. She's feeling less pressure from the other side. She already was convicted that this is a human being and she doesn't want to get an abortion. Right. So she ends up deciding to, have this baby. And so what was really cool is my wife and I were able to actually give her a bunch of stuff for her apartment. She was trying to get away from her boyfriend, get a new apartment, this and that. And she had no clue that we knew the backstory. So we were able to meet her. And so excited. This is just a few weeks later. She basically said, because we were newly married, she goes, "Oh, I hope you guys get pregnant soon, because then our kids could be friends, and whatever." Mm-hmm. In the end, she ended up moving away. But the interesting thing is, we're talking about a 2 or 3 week gap here where she's excited to be pregnant.
That's
obviously
awesome.
Challenges and all that. The cool thing about this, and I share this story for a few reasons, she ended up getting closer connected to that church and actually getting saved and getting baptized into that local church.
Man, praise God.
And there's after a lot of different things. There's prayer, and I think there was even some visions or dreams. But the whole thing is, this church cared for her. It had nothing to do with whether she went to church with them or not. They cared for her. They cared for the baby, and they were unashamed about their view, but they were very much caring for her. The reason part of why I bring up that story is a lot of people will say, look, just forget about abortion, just talk about, let's say, Christianity, and then their viewpoint will change. But the thing is, a lot of times Christians don't have a pro-life view anyway. And this is actually how Nancy got connected to the church. She was pregnant, she needed help, and we were able to help her. And what's cool about that is that started with a disaster, right? Susan didn't know what she was doing. She stressed out about it and she freaked out, but she ended up being able to help Nancy in that way. And so I think that's an example where she was persistent. She didn't give up. She prayed about it a lot and tried to see what she could do. And that at the same time, there was like 3 or 4 different groups that helped Susan. It wasn't like she did it on her own. So that's the other thing I would probably say is, don't try to be some hero on your own. It may be on you, or you may lose a friendship. We've had people like that too, where they basically put a friendship on the line, tell the person's mom or something, or their dad or something like that, and the baby is saved because the girl feels stupid. She's mad that her mom knows, but she keeps the baby, and then like a month later, 2 months later, I'm really thankful you told my mom, even though I was annoyed 2 months ago, that kind of thing. So you never know. It could be on you, but a lot of times there's help, and a lot of times you're not the person, but God maybe put somebody else alongside you. Just like in the story of the Good Samaritan, there's other people that come alongside and help.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that brings up another element that I think is really great about the way you guys approach things as a ministry. We get, in some sense, there's a way that I would consider you guys street preachers, in the sense that you go from campus to campus, going to like the plazas or the very open air area and talking about an issue. And one of my biggest critiques to the street preachers we normally get is they don't connect at all with the ministries that are there.
Mm,
And that's something that you guys are very different of. Like the first time you and I met, you were like, hey man, like I'd love, what church are you connected with? I'd love to figure out ways that we could be doing things with your church. And we're working on doing some of that this next year. From the get-go, that was part of the way JFA functions.
mm-hmm,
And that sort of thing, I think, speaks well of you guys as a ministry, really well of you guys as a ministry, but it
mm,
also shows an example of then how we need to be doing things. Like in your story, not looking at it as, all right, well, I got this person that I'm trying to reach out to share the gospel with or to talk about this issue of abortion with, and I'm going to try to do this all on my own. And if they get convinced that they should keep the child, then I'll be their support, but I'm not going to reach out to my church. There's so many great organizations. You know, to me, one of the things here in Fort Collins is it's cool to look at. You know, you guys come out here and be a little bit of a boost as far as training and equipping churches to know how to talk about these issues. We have the Murphy Center. We have a couple of the Catholic charity organizations here in town. We have the Alpha Center. We have all of these different organizations and a lot of churches as well that even have programs that I know less about individually to help out children or parents in these
mm-hmm,
situations, and how we just need to pour into those resources more. And some of that can also like offset on a more logical showing that we as pro-life organizations care about the child and the mother beyond the womb,
mm-hmm.
showing here's all those resources that are available to you. And I think that's a crucial part to all of this, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, one quick point I wanted to make about that, and kind of going back to a previous question as well,
Yeah.
is, I think we don't want to make this again a tit for tat point, but the idea that abortion is legal in, at least now, still in a lot of states, and I think still for the majority of people in our country, it's legal in their state, and they could easily go to other states. There's some different things with that, but uh, yeah, there is. Um, Man, I blanked again. Why do I do that? I do have 5 kids. I don't know if that plays in. I don't want to make it.
Could be.
But I was just gonna say, this is a legal choice.
Right.
6 months ago, it was a legal choice basically anytime during the pregnancy. Now it's still a legal choice in most states, or in a lot of states, and most of the people that are represented in our country, it's legal for. And I think that's a fair point to make for people. Is, look, here's something that it's a legal choice to do. It's not legal to kill homeless people. It's not legal to kill 3-year-olds. It's not legal to kill somebody who has cancer who's 7. These are people. Yeah, of course we want to help all these people outside the womb, but let's just be straightforward. This is a legal thing that
Right.
we're talking about, a barbaric thing that's legal in our society, and it seems reasonable that there would be groups dedicated to that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a lot of these other things, may even be popular things to do, and that's great. It's still important to do those things and to care about, let's say, sex trafficking or some other thing in society that gets much less pushback. At the same time, this is something that's legal in our society, so I just think it's important to think about that. But yeah, you brought up the local church. One of our main themes, and people can see this on our website, jfaweb.org, and or /love3 is our online workshops as well. But even just thinking about more stuff on our website, and we'll list some of these things, I guess, in the notes or whatever. But one of the things that we want to do at the local church is come alongside this place of discipleship. So we would make the claim as Christians that people should be learning this as part of their discipleship. And then, we work with non-Christians as well. But at the same time, a lot of times we are working with, let's say, the local church or a local ministry, and we do believe that this should be something they're learning. Now, sometimes a church is doing great, or a ministry is doing great with this, and in a sense, we don't even need to help them. Maybe we can partner, or maybe we can just say, keep doing what you're doing. Good job, But what we found is a lot of times this is left out of discipleship. So defending the defenseless, or being ready to actually defend your faith, being creative with your faith and like praying for people around you, asking God to help to reach them, different things like that should all be part of growing as a disciple. And we found that there's a, a lack of that, or a hole in that discipleship. And so again, we're not arrogant to say that. We're just saying we think we have something that can be helpful for a lot of people. And as you said, I think at the very beginning, it turns out that why most people don't talk about this is they don't know what to say, or they
Right.
know that they're going to say something really mean and they're going to mouth off or something. And so that's where, yeah, it could help a lot to get more training or to practice this, so that we actually practice loving somebody and getting these opportunities. Some people don't know where to find a conversation. And we found that talking to strangers is actually a really good opportunity to test it out, because it is a little bit less stressful for most people to just talk to somebody who cares, but you don't know them. So that's our goal. And so in a sense, our hope would be that we'd be in communities where eventually it'd be like, look, we don't really need a whole lot more help from you, because we do know how to do this now, and we could go to communities that are much less equipped in that way. And so I think that's a key point, just in terms of assuming that that ministries and churches are already connected in these communities. We're coming in from the outside, but we still think that we could be a help. And so we try to have humility in that way and try to really find a win-win with that organization. There's been times where I've said, it seems like maybe this isn't a great fit for what you guys are trying to do right now, and we may end up focusing on a different group, in that way. There's ministries, for instance, that are focusing mainly on evangelism to non-believers. Now, that doesn't mean that some of those people in that ministry couldn't get trained to also be ready when they're at the lunch counter, or they're at work, or they're at the gym or something. They could also be an advocate. And at the same time, we realize that they're probably not going to turn over 100 of their people that they're interacting with over to us to be trained, because 98
Right.
of them are pro-choice anyway, and they're not going to go through our training. So we understand that we're not going to be a total fit for everybody, but trying to understand what's happening locally. And we found, kind of like meeting a pro-choice person, when we meet a pro-life person in town, or a pro-life church, if we're willing to ask some questions and listen, try to understand what they're trying to do, usually there can be a fit there, either some sort of win-win, or maybe the timing's not right, but either way we can have a good discussion on that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jon, it's been awesome having you on the show. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed it. I think people will find this as a great resource, and hopefully this can even be maybe something this is something you send out to the people of your ministry to let them know
Yeah.
what you're up to and that sort of thing. I always close out with letting the guests kind of have any last words, if there's anything else that you'd like to kind of share with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, one thing probably the biggest thing that comes to mind is just thanking my wife, Corinne. She's done a great job. I mean, we have 5 kids in 8 years. It's been a lot of work.
Yeah.
She's a hero of mine. I'm not on the road as much as I used to be when I was single, but I'm on the road a decent bit, and she holds down the fort. And there's just a lot that she does behind the scenes. And I speak for a lot of other missionaries I know, and that doesn't mean it's always the wife that's doing that, but it could be the husband that's helping in a different way for the wife who's in the ministry. But I would just say, yeah, shout out to Corinne for all she's done, and just coming alongside, being a part of our ministry. When we were dating and then newly married, she was actually able to participate. I remember one of the first times is in Georgia, she said, look, just because I'm married you doesn't mean I'm going to be good at this, like, actually, you're really good at this. And she's one of the most patient people. She listens really, really well. I've learned a lot from her in that way. And so I'm just really thankful for my wife and my family supporting me. And to all the people over the last 16, 17 years who have helped me either go on trips or support our ministry in different ways. I mean, we're all a team in that way. And I just really am thankful for that. And so really a shout out to them. Just none of us can do this on our own. We all need people behind us encouraging. And maybe that's just maybe a plug for people that are watching to, think about somebody that's in your life that's been an encouragement to you, and try to reach out and be an encouragement to them, or, maybe send them some funding or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I would say that's a big thing to close.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. We will put in the description of this video links to your website, and even a link, if you can send me a link of where they would go if they wanted to send you support, and we'll put that in the description as well. So,
Okay.
John, thanks a lot. This has been really awesome. Like I said, I think this is just going to be a really cool resource for people to kind of come back to and review and just get some good tips and think through this well, and hopefully give people boldness to start wanting to talk about this more. So thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Noah.
Yeah, for sure.
I will talk soon.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. So that is this week. Next week, my hope is to actually have a guy from one of our other Ratio Christi chapters at Colorado Mesa come and share with us about his experience being chapter director. He actually started getting interested in apologetics, feeling a call into ministry while he was a professional ballerina. So a really cool story that hopefully he will be able to share with us next week. Not certain if that's going to be the show next week, but either way, next week, 4 o'clock, we'll have another live. See you then.